the harsh reality is that this decision will cost lives. It will cost lives, Minister. Brexit Britain is rapidly exposing the future it offers, out of step and out of influence on the world stage. Because one thing is for sure, if the Tory government digs its heels in and slashes the aid budget, they are adding insult to injury to those dwindling few that still desperately cling on to the notion of global Britain. Mr. Speaker, digging into the detail of these cuts reveals what's at stake if they are allowed to continue. The headline figures are stark enough in themselves, with aid spending amounting to £10 billion this year compared to £14.5 billion in 2020. But it's the impact of where exactly these cuts will fall that tells the real story and exposes the real damage. Almost unbelievably, conflict zones are facing some of the worst cuts. Syria, Somalia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Libya, Nigeria and the Lebanon, all, Mr. Speaker, are poised to lose more than half their funding. More than half the funding in the countries of conflict. Is that where we stand? Is that where the Minister stands? Is that where his government stands? Children are the next target, with the United Nations Children's Funds facing a cut of 60%. Mr. Speaker, this is harrowing. This is heartbreaking. May I ask the Minister, where is the government's humanity at a time of need? And some of the most established and impactful projects are equally at risk, with cuts to the UN agency that fights AIDS and HIV of £12.5 million. That's more than an 80% cut. An 80% cut in a programme to fight AIDS, condemning people to an early death that could be avoidable. Much has already been made of the fact that by imposing these aid cuts, the government are brazenly breaking their own manifesto commitment. In particular, though, I want to draw attention to the fact that they are breaking a very specific commitment they made to voters in terms of girls' education right across the globe. And I think it's worth putting this on the record of the House. In 2019, the Conservative Party manifesto promised, and I quote, to stand up for the right of every girl in the world to have 12 years of quality education. And yet, that promise has been broken. Analysis by Save the Children shows that spending on education for girls will be reduced by at least 25% compared to 2019-20 levels. This is horrific. So not only will these cuts impact now, the damage will reverberate into the future for those young girls and young women. Their hopes and fears crashed on the dogma of the desire to cut UK aid spending. Only this weekend, a letter from 1,700 charities and academics said that families are going hungry and girls are missing school as a direct result of these decisions. I can see the Minister is nodding. I'd ask him, please reflect. Please reflect and change the government's policy on what they're doing. Whether it's broad promises or specific promises, they're apparently all the same to this UK government. They are telling people that they think their promises are only there to be broken. Mr. Speaker, I want to say this though. I acknowledge and I give credit to the courage of the many Conservative backbenchers who stood against their Prime Minister, who's reneging on the very manifesto that he stood on. Their stance has given us at least a chance to face down the government on this issue and hopefully force a U-turn. But from a Scottish perspective, I can't hide my genuine disappointment that we can't count the Scottish Tories amongst the Conservative backbenchers with a backbone. For weeks now, they have maintained a deafening and shameful silence. But even at this late stage, they have the chance to do the right thing. Because whatever our differences, I think they know that cutting international aid during a pandemic does not represent the values of Scotland or the values of our people. That's why the Scottish Government is doing what it can with the powers it has at Holyrood, where we have increased international aid spending by 50%. That's what you do in a pandemic, Minister. So the Scottish Conservatives have a choice. Either fall in behind their Prime Minister no matter what he decides, or join us in saying that these cuts to the world's poorest are not done in our name. If they fail to oppose these cuts, the Scottish Tories should be well warned. Not only would it be an inhumane act against the most vulnerable, but it would be an act of sheer hypocrisy. Mr. Speaker, let me conclude on this. Today's debate on aid spending is obviously all the more significant because of the place and the context in which we all find ourselves. Morally, we have a responsibility to help protect the most vulnerable around the world. But it's also self-evident that if this UK government is serious about the eradication of COVID-19, then it must include a commitment to helping eradicate COVID-19 around the world. Because until all of us are safe, none of us are truly safe. These aid cuts are severely undermining that commitment and limit our power in meeting the COVID challenge. But there is a broader point too. As we attempt to emerge from this pandemic, the values we live by and the choices we now make become even more important. COVID has affected every country and every person around the world. We have all faced the same threat. We have all been in it together. If we didn't know that before, we should know it now. But the truth is that just because we have experienced the pandemic together does not mean our challenges are in any way equal. We are privileged. We can live in the hope and the expectation that the crisis of the pandemic will pass. But for too many millions in this world, this pandemic is only one more disaster to deal with for these countries who suffer under constant crisis and struggle. Now is not the time to turn our face away from those countries and those people in need. Now is the time to redouble our efforts and our commitment to them. The World Bank predicts that the pandemic will push an estimated 88 to 115 million people into extreme poverty. And in the world's poorest countries, hunger and the causes of malaria are rising. So unless we act now, one crisis will be followed by another, and the cycle will go on and on and on. We simply can't break that poverty cycle by breaking our commitment to overseas aid. This is the choice for the government. It is the choice for every member of this House. On these benches, our choice is clear. It is time to live up to our commitments on aid spending. It is time to live up to our responsibilities to the world's poorest. It is time to break the cycle.
Can I just